Chapter 1. The Vanishing at First Light. The mist clung low over the waters of Dawn's Bridge, soft tendrils curling around its pale stone arches like the fingers of some ancient ghost. The bridge, a picturesque 17th century structure spanning the sleepy River Wey, had long served as a local landmark near the Norfolk countryside. Locals said the bridge was lucky for lovers, but cursed for liars. This morning, however, the air held no trace of romance, only an eerie stillness. At precisely 6:17 a.m, Constable Hugo Trench pressed a trembling hand against the cold iron railing as he peered over the side. His bicycle lay abandoned a few feet away, its tyres slick with dew. Below, the river murmured a lullaby of indifference, its waters slow-moving and brown with silt. The constable squinted at a patch of disrupted mud on the bank. Something was off. Something had happened here. He felt it in his bones. More troubling still was the empty Daimler motorcar left idling at the start of the bridge, its driver's door hanging open. The mist swirled through the interior like a phantom. By 7:05 a.m, the local paper, the Elway Courier, had caught the scent of scandal. By Nini, the villagers were murmuring in huddles outside the village post office, and by noon, the name on everyone's lips was Caleb Hargrave, concert violinist, society darling, and heir to the Hargrave shipping fortune. A man known as much for his passionate performances as for his complex private life. He had vanished. The Daimler belonged to him. The jacket on the passenger seat matched the one he had been seen wearing at the Grand Gala the previous evening at Hargrave Hall, a sprawling estate just 2 miles away. He had left early, claiming a headache, and asked not to be disturbed. No one saw him arrive home, and now his car was here, engine cooled, door ajar, and no sign of Caleb. The only person who claimed to have seen anything of note was Mrs. Dorian Flint, a retired opera singer turned recluse, who occupied a small ivy-draped cottage overlooking the river bend. "I heard music," she told the constable with wide, dream-haunted eyes. "Around 5, a violin, just a few bars of it drifting in through the open window. Paganini, I think. Then, silence. It was uncanny." As news of the disappearance spread, so did speculation. Some whispered of suicide, others of abduction. A few believed it was nothing more than a publicity stunt for Caleb's rumoured comeback tour. But when a search of the riverbanks turned up no sign of struggle, no footprints, and no body, the theory that chilled most hearts was the one left unspoken. He had been taken, willingly or otherwise, and not by mortal means. By evening, Hargrave Hall stood solemn and watchful at the crest of the hill. Its vast windows, normally aglow with laughter and champagne light, remained dark. Inside, 3 people paced with increasing unease. Viola Hargrave, Caleb's elder sister and executrix of the family estate, clutched a tumbler of scotch in her delicate, ring-laden fingers. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of exhaustion, worry, and something else. Relief, perhaps. Across from her, Dorian Flint's godson, the young and meticulous Mr. Leo Barrington, flipped through a small notebook, lips thin and tight. He had only recently returned from the continent, where he had been studying forensic psychology. "The timing is suspicious," he murmured. "This is no accident." And near the grand piano, resting her hand lightly on the polished lid, stood Nadine Vaughan, Caleb's on-again, off-again lover, and a renowned violinist in her own right. Her face bore none of its usual theatrical defiance. She looked pale and somehow afraid. It was Nadine who spoke first. He wouldn't just vanish, not without telling someone, not like this. Viola's lips twitched. "He left a gala, Nadine, not a suicide note." Barrington interjected smoothly. "The car was found on the bridge. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing but silence and fog. It's a message, if anything." "A performance," Nadine said bitterly. "Everything with Caleb always is." At that moment, a knock echoed through the marble entrance hall. Not loud, not rushed, precise, almost musical. Viola glanced at the butler, who disappeared down the corridor and returned moments later, followed by a short, impeccably dressed man with a gleaming head and an extravagant moustache. He inclined his head. "Mesdames, monsieur, you're expecting perhaps a miracle. I offer instead the humble services of Hercule Poirot." A silence fell, dense as the morning fog. Viola narrowed her eyes. "We didn't summon the police?" Mais non, Poirot said with a smile, smoothing his coat. You summoned curiosity. A whisper here, a telegram there, a disappearance upon a bridge with no witnesses, no signs, and a violinist, no. The violin is an instrument of passion and precision, a contradiction, like all murderers. Barrington stared. You think this is murder? Poirot's gaze swept the room like a scalpel. I think someone has composed a symphony of deceit, and I intend to read the notes. And with that, he stepped fully into Hargrave Hall, into the mystery, the silence, and the storm yet to come. Chapter 2. Shadows Beneath the Surface. The drawing-room of Hargrave Hall was elegant in a way that spoke not of warmth, but of lineage. Every armchair, every book spine, every oil painting had been chosen not for comfort but for tradition. Poirot, ever sensitive to atmosphere, noted the sterile harmony of the room as he settled lightly onto a damask chair that seemed determined to discourage relaxation. I will ask only the simplest of questions to begin, he said, folding his gloved hands, because you see it is always the first detail, the overlooked, the dismissed, that sings the truth. Nadine Vaughan, arms crossed tightly, replied with brittle poise, You'll find there's precious little to go on. On the contrary, Poirot said, eyes twinkling faintly, there is always something, even in silence. Leo Barrington stood near the fireplace, his posture too composed to be casual. We've already scoured the riverbank and bridge. The local police believe he jumped. And you do not? Poirot asked. Barrington's jaw shifted slightly. Caleb was melodramatic, but he wasn't suicidal. Poirot tilted his head. Melodrama, yes. A musician's temperament, but suicide. He paused, glancing toward Viola. Mademoiselle Hargrave, you are his sister. You know him well? As well as anyone ever could. Her voice was cool, clipped. Caleb had a habit of disappearing, usually for effect. This could very well be another game. But one staged upon a foggy bridge, at an unnatural hour, with a car left running and no note. Poirot shook his head gently. No, I do not think so. He rose and walked to the tall window that overlooked the distant river bend. Through the glass the afternoon light had taken on the hue of pewter, casting long, ghostly shadows across the lawn. I would like to see his rooms, he said softly. Viola hesitated, then gave a nod. Mr. Gurwood will take you. The butler appeared wordlessly at the doorway, his presence somehow spectral. Upstairs, Caleb's quarters revealed more about the man than his family ever would. A musician's soul lived here, restless and volatile. The bed was unmade. Sheet music lay scattered across the desk, some pages violently scratched out in red ink. On the floor by the armchair sat an upturned coffee cup, the dark stain of its contents forming an irregular shape on the rug like a wounded heart. Poirot's eyes swept across the room. He walked slowly, pausing often. A bottle of absinthe, barely touched, stood on a shelf near a metronome, its pendulum frozen in mid-swing. He stopped at the writing desk. Mon Dieu, he whispered. In the drawer lay a half-finished letter. The handwriting, fluid, impatient, suggested it had been dashed off in haste. Viola, I cannot keep doing this. The rehearsals, the pretending, the man you're asking me to become does not exist anymore. I'll give them the performance of a lifetime, but not the one you expect. Do not follow me. Do not call the papers. If you understand me at all, you'll know this is not goodbye. It is something else. No signature. Just a line struck through at the bottom, where his name might have gone. Poirot read it twice before gently folding it back. His eyes narrowed with thought. When he returned to the drawing-room, Viola glanced up with a raised brow. You found his tantrum letter, then? Poirot inclined his head. You knew about it? I found it early this morning before the police came. I chose not to give it to them. I didn't want it misconstrued. Most interesting, Poirot murmured. You withheld it. Pourquoi? Because people misunderstand Caleb. His words sound grandiose, even threatening, but he often wrote such things to unsettle me. It was part of our dynamic. And the mention of a performance of a lifetime? Poirot asked. Viola lifted her glass, took a slow sip, and said nothing. Across the room, Nadine's voice cut in. If he's hiding, it's because of her. Viola's been trying to drag him back into public life, into endless concert engagements he no longer wanted. He was exhausted. Viola shot her a look. You're hardly an unbiased source, Nadine. You were part of that exhaustion. Poirot raised a hand gently. Mesdames, let us not allow bitterness to obscure the facts. He turned to Barrington. You mentioned earlier that you believed this disappearance was staged. I didn't say staged, I said deliberately, Barrington replied, voice even. Caleb had secrets. Many. He'd been acting strange for weeks, mood swings, paranoia. He kept talking about a letter he received, something that rattled him. I never saw it, but he said it would change everything. A letter? From whom? No idea. He never said. Poirot nodded slowly. Then I must ask to see his personal correspondence, all of it. Viola gave a reluctant sigh. Fine, but I doubt you'll find much. Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. I am counting on it, mademoiselle. Outside, the evening deepened. The mist had returned, curling once more around the pale arches of Dawn's Bridge. The river whispered its secrets to no one. Inside Hargrave Hall the game had begun, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells stirring to life, began to tune his ear to the music behind the lies. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By the following morning, Hargrave Hall was no longer the seat of quiet, aristocratic mourning. It had become the centre of whispered theories, veiled accusations, and brittle civility. Inspector Altham of the Norfolk Constabulary had officially declared Caleb Hargrave a missing person, though his tone suggested he suspected the worst. But Poirot, undeterred by the fog outside or the unease within, had other plans. He requested, politely of course, that all individuals connected to Caleb be gathered in the music room by 10 o'clock sharp. I do not wish to be interrogated, he had told Viola with a pleasant smile, only to observe. When one listens to a symphony, one must hear all the instruments, not just the soloist. The music room, though rarely used in recent months, bore the faded grandeur of an era long past. Dust caught the light in lazy spirals, and an imposing harpsichord stood silent in the corner. Portraits of long-dead Hargraves watched from the walls, their expressions equally stern and smug. At 10:03 everyone had assembled. Viola Hargrave took the armchair nearest the hearth, legs crossed, brows drawn together like finely inked lines. Her dress was a muted charcoal grey, but her presence was anything but muted. Nadine Vaughan hovered near the window, chain-smoking slim cigarettes, her jaw clenched with a tension that seemed older than the mystery itself. Leo Barrington stood stiffly at the back, notebook in hand, trying, rather unsuccessfully, not to look like he was taking notes on everyone. And then there were the others. Gideon Marsh, Caleb's longtime business manager, had arrived at Poirot's invitation with a look of discomfort poorly hidden beneath his pinstripe suit. Thin, grey-templed and perpetually perspiring, Gideon had been with the Hargrave family for nearly 20 years. I wasn't aware I was under suspicion, he grumbled to Poirot as he took a seat. Mais non, Poirot had replied. But when a man disappears without a trace, it is necessary to speak with those who benefit from his presence, or his absence. Next came Estelle Warwick, a pale, sharp-featured young woman with high cheekbones and deep-set eyes. Once Caleb's assistant, now unofficially dismissed, though the terms of her departure were hazy at best. She said nothing as she sat, but her eyes flicked constantly between Nadine and Viola with open wariness. Lastly arrived Mrs. Dorian Flint, dressed dramatically in black velvet with a feathered hat tilted just so. Despite her years, her posture was regal, her eyes theatrical. She greeted Poirot with a flourish. I told the constable what I saw, or rather, what I heard, but I suspect you will believe me more than he did. Poirot nodded graciously and turned to address the room. Mes amis, he began, a man has vanished. There is no body, no clear crime, only absence. But absence, he paused, often speaks more truthfully than presence, so let us begin with what is known. He stepped closer to the grand piano and rested his fingertips on the lid. Monsieur Caleb Hargrave left a gala, drove toward this house, and never arrived. His car was found near Dawn's Bridge, empty. There are no witnesses to his departure, but we do have, he smiled at Mrs. Flint, the testimony of one who heard music in the mist. Mrs. Flint nodded with a dramatic air. Violin, just a phrase, then silence. Poirot turned. Monsieur Marsh, you managed Caleb's affairs, did you not? I did, Gideon licked his lips. Until recently, when Caleb became erratic. He withdrew from the concert circuit, cancelled tours, ignored contracts. And did this pose a financial strain? It did, Marsh admitted. For all of us. He was the family's primary source of income. Without his performances, he gestured vaguely, there were complications. Viola's voice, sharp as a tuning fork, cut in. We were managing just fine. The estate has resources. But not without consequence, Poirot murmured. He turned to Nadine. Mademoiselle Vaughan, you were in a romantic entanglement with Monsieur Hargrave, her jaw tightened. You could call it that, though entanglement may be too polite. And yet you remained close. Close? No. Familiar, yes. I was at the gala. We didn't speak. Estelle spoke up suddenly. He tried to speak to her, though. He approached her in the garden. I saw it. Nadine's eyes snapped toward her. That's a lie. Poirot raised a hand. Ah, voilà. Emotion enters the room. Always instructive. Estelle's voice quivered slightly. He said he had something urgent to discuss, that she wouldn't like it. Enough, Nadine hissed, but Poirot pressed gently. And you, Mademoiselle Estelle, why were you dismissed from Caleb's service? Her lips pursed. Because I refused to keep secrets. Caleb had begun hiding things, letters, financial statements, and strange meetings. People I didn't recognize. Can you recall any names? She shook her head. No, but I believe one of them came to the gala. Who? Poirot asked quietly. She hesitated. A woman, blonde, foreign accent. Caleb looked terrified. A beat of silence followed her words. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. We are beginning to hear dissonance in the melody, mes amis, and soon the true theme will emerge. He gave a slight bow. That will be all for now, but do not stray too far. The next note may sound when you least expect it. And with that, he turned from the room, leaving behind a chorus of suspicion. Chapter 4. The Maestro at Work. After dismissing the suspects, Poirot took to pacing the gravel path that wound along the eastern gardens of Hargrave Hall, his polished shoes crunching rhythmically with each step. Hastings, had he been present, would no doubt have remarked upon the absurdity of such fastidious pacing in the cold. But Poirot, deep in thought, was attuned to other matters, inconsistencies in tone, silence where there should have been noise, and the curious sense that everyone was saying just a little too much, or not quite enough. Behind him, the hall loomed stately and still, while the mist began its lazy return over the hills like a curtain drawing across the stage. By 11:30, Poirot requested tea be brought to the blue sitting-room, his preferred setting for reflection. It was a smaller, more intimate space lined with porcelain figurines and delicate watercolours, far removed from the theatrics of the music-room. Viola Hargrave joined him uninvited, her demeanour composed yet subtly brittle. You seem to enjoy unsettling people, Monsieur Poirot, she said, crossing her legs with practised elegance. Poirot stirred his tea thoughtfully. Non, madame, I do not enjoy unsettling, but I do value revelation, and revelation requires a little, how shall we say, friction. Viola studied him. Do you think this is all an act, that Caleb vanished on purpose for drama or revenge? That is one possibility, but the details do not harmonize, he sipped. Tell me, what was the last conversation you had with your brother? She tilted her head. 3 nights ago, we argued. About? Money, expectations, Nadine. A faint grimace. I reminded him that the Hargrave name was not his to throw away on romantic wanderings and emotional whims. And how did he respond? He told me I had no soul and walked out. Poirot gave a small, sympathetic nod. Families often trade cruelty for currency, n'est-ce pas? Viola didn't respond. Her eyes flicked toward the porcelain rabbit on the mantelpiece. Poirot leaned forward slightly. You knew about the letter he received, the one Barrington mentioned? Her gaze shifted. I knew about it. Caleb mentioned it in passing. Something about a threat or a confession. It was never clear. But he was agitated afterward. Moody. You did not ask to see it? I stopped trying to understand Caleb years ago. Poirot said nothing for a long moment, then rose. Merci, madame. You have been most helpful. As Viola left, Poirot turned toward the window, arms crossed. The mists had nearly swallowed the line between lawn and woods now. The bridge would be all but invisible. At noon, he asked to visit the bridge. Constable Trench accompanied him reluctantly, having little fondness for Belgian detectives or philosophical inquiries. But he respected authority, and Poirot's name had come with quiet, heavy weight. "Nothing new's turned up," Trench muttered as they approached the bridge. "No footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle. The river's shallow here, but murky. If he jumped, well, he'd have made it downstream by now. But we've found nothing." Poirot scanned the area. The bridge's stonework was damp, the iron railing cold under his gloved hand. The mud on the banks was drying now, but Poirot crouched carefully, examining the soil where the car had been parked. He pulled a small magnifying glass from his coat pocket. "See here," he murmured. "2 sets of prints. One heavy, one lighter. But the lighter one is peculiar. The stride is too narrow, too careful." Trench looked over his shoulder. Could be the vicar's boy, always cycling this way. "No," Poirot said. "This person walked here deliberately, but then did not return. Note how the deeper impressions turn back, but the lighter ones stop at the bridge's edge, as if someone walked to the middle and vanished. You think someone else was here with him? I think someone wanted it to look like Caleb was here." He turned to the constable, eyes sharp now. "And I need access to his car. Immediately." By the time they returned to the constabulary outpost where the Daimler had been impounded, the fog had reached full descent, turning the countryside into a grey watercolour. The vehicle stood inside a dim garage bay, cordoned off and untouched since its discovery. Poirot opened the door and lowered himself into the driver's seat with unexpected agility. "There," he murmured. The glove compartment was empty, no surprise. But beneath the floor mat on the passenger side he found something wedged in the carpet. A matchbook. La Belle Plume, Paris. He examined it carefully. Only one match was missing. "Odd," Poirot said. "Caleb did not smoke. Nadine smokes, but not matches. She uses a silver lighter, which means—" He flipped the matchbook over. Inside the cardboard cover was a hastily scribbled word in black ink. "Fidèle." He stared at the word for a long moment, then pocketed the item. "Tell no one of this yet," he said softly to Trench. Poirot stood beside the car for a while longer, alone now. The mist curled at the windows. The matchbook, the letter, the music in the fog. Yes, it was all coming together, but not yet clear, not yet whole. Somewhere the orchestra was tuning. The overture was ending. Chapter 5. Voices Behind the Mask. By mid-afternoon, Poirot had arranged for a series of private interviews to be conducted in the Hargrave Library. A sombre room with oak-panelled walls, heavy velvet drapes, and a grandfather clock that ticked with an almost accusatory rhythm. It was here, amidst the dust of forgotten volumes and the quiet breath of ancient rugs, that he would begin dissecting not facts, but people. Constable Trench, rather suspicious of Poirot's methods, had been relegated to the hallway, pen poised in an empty notebook he had no idea how to fill. Poirot preferred it that way. The truth, he often said, bloomed best in silence. The first to be summoned was Gideon Marsh, the family's long-serving business manager. Marsh entered with the gait of a man accustomed to bad news, his brow already damp before a word had been spoken. "You have managed the Hargrave finances for how long, Monsieur Marsh?" Poirot asked gently, gesturing for him to sit. "Since 2009. Caleb's father brought me on just before his health declined." "And you remained after his death?" Marsh nodded, folding his hands tightly. "Viola inherited control of the estate, but it was Caleb who brought in the money, at least until he changed." "Change in what way?" Marsh hesitated. "He became erratic, missed rehearsals, cancelled tours last minute. He claimed to be working on a pure musical composition, something untouched by money. He resented the business of his talent." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you resent that?" "I resented the consequences. He owed people, promoters, venues, investors. I had to smooth it all over. Viola tried to rein him in, but Caleb didn't respond to control. Not hers, not anyone's." Poirot watched him closely. "You stood to lose significantly if Caleb disappeared." "I stood to lose more if he stayed, in the state he was in," Marsh muttered, then looked up with alarm. "I don't mean that's how it sounds. I wanted him well, stable, not gone." Poirot nodded calmly. "You may go, Monsieur Marsh. Merci." Next came Estelle Warwick, nervous and clutching her handbag like a lifebuoy. She sat on the edge of her chair, posture taut. "Tell me about your employment with Monsieur Hargrave," Poirot said, voice kind. "I was hired as his assistant last year. Scheduling, communications, helping him organise sheet music, and his life, frankly. And when did things begin to sour? 3 months ago, Caleb started withdrawing. From his music, from people. He would go missing for hours, come back with wild eyes, speaking of things that didn't make sense. Codes, keys, hidden meanings in music." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Did he ever mention the word fidèle to you?" Estelle blinked. "No, not that I remember." "And the letter he received? The one Barrington mentioned?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, he wouldn't let me see it. But I noticed it had foreign stamps. France, I think. He tore it into pieces the next day, but he looked like he'd seen a ghost." Poirot watched her closely. "And what was your relationship with Viola like?" "Cold," Estelle said bluntly. "She didn't like that I got too close to Caleb. She accused me of filling his head with nonsense. I think she feared losing control." "Did you? Lose control?" "No," Poirot said softly. "Gain it." Estelle flinched but said nothing more. Poirot gave a slight nod. "That will be all for now, mademoiselle." Leo Barrington was the third to arrive, bringing with him an air of quiet calculation. He took the seat without needing to be asked. "You are a student of psychology, I understand," Poirot began. "Yes, Vienna, then Paris. I've worked with police in Europe on several behavioural studies. And your role in this household?" "Observer, occasional advisor. Viola often asked for my counsel, especially when Caleb became unpredictable." Poirot folded his hands. "You mentioned earlier that Caleb believed someone was threatening him." "Yes, he was paranoid. Not unreasonably, perhaps. He believed something from his past was returning to haunt him." "Did he specify?" "No, but he referenced an old affair, possibly from his conservatoire days in France." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "La Belle Plume?" Barrington blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Poirot smiled. "A nightclub in Paris, rather exclusive. Does the name mean nothing?" Barrington's voice was smooth, but the pause before he answered was too long. "No, nothing at all." Poirot did not press the matter, but made a mental note of the hesitation. "And your view on Viola's handling of her brother?" "She did what she could, but she lacks empathy. To her, everything is a transaction, control, power. Caleb rebelled against that." Poirot tilted his head. "And you? Did you also feel the weight of her control?" Barrington gave a cool smile. "I know how to stay out of reach." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Barrington." Lastly came Nadine Vaughan. She entered silently, her perfume trailing behind her like a ghost of roses past. She did not sit immediately, instead gazing out the library window at the fog-silvered lawn. "You loved him," Poirot said simply. "Yes." Her voice was rough, tired. "Even when I hated him." "What changed?" "He did. After Paris, after that summer, he became restless, afraid even. He told me once he'd done something unforgivable, but he never said what." "Did he mention the word fidèle?" Nadine turned slowly. "That was the name of a piece he once tried to write. Said it was too dangerous to finish." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous in what way?" She shrugged. "Said it would expose everything, that it had to stay incomplete. And now? He told me 2 nights ago that he'd finished it, that he would play it soon, and then he vanished." Poirot stood slowly. "Merci, mademoiselle." As she left, Poirot remained still, alone now, with the ticking clock and the quiet hush of dust settling around secrets. Each interview had offered something, a sliver of truth, a crack in the facade. But still, the full shape of the mystery remained obscured, like a melody played in a distant room, just beyond hearing. But not for long. Chapter 6. The first false lead. The following morning dawned cold and metallic, the mist hanging heavier than ever, as if the very landscape were reluctant to let go of its secrets. Poirot stood in the solarium, sipping a tisane, gazing at the dewy hedges with their sharp angles and clipped curves. Beauty and order, yes. But what was hiding within the order of the Hargrave household? At precisely 8:45 a.m., Constable Trench arrived with news that crackled with urgency. "We found something," he said, holding up a clear evidence bag with gloved hands. Inside it, a slim gold bracelet, twisted and stained, its clasp broken. Found this near the bend below Dawn's Bridge, under a pile of loose reeds. Could have been overlooked in the initial sweep. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Et voilà. And it is not Caleb's? No, Trench said grimly. We showed it to Miss Hargrave. She said it belonged to Nadine Vaughan. Indeed, Poirot murmured, setting his cup aside. Then it is time we speak to Mademoiselle Vaughan once more. Nadine met them in the smaller salon, curled on a chaise longue with a blanket over her knees. Her complexion was pale, her hair hastily pinned. When Trench revealed the bracelet, her reaction was immediate. Too immediate. That's mine, she said at once, reaching for it through the plastic. Where did you... Beneath the bridge, Trench said curtly. Care to explain how it got there? I don't know, she stammered. It must have fallen. Maybe I dropped it at the gala and someone picked it up. Poirot's voice was gentle but precise. No, mademoiselle. It was found beneath reeds, buried, not dropped, not lost. She faltered, her eyes darting. It's just a bracelet. It doesn't prove anything. But it suggests proximity, Poirot said softly. You claimed you last saw Caleb at the gala, but made no contact. Yet this tells a different story. Nadine swallowed. I told you, we didn't speak. But I did see him, briefly, that night, after I left. Continuez, s'il vous plaît. I was driving home. I took the long route past the river. I saw his car parked by the bridge. I pulled over. I don't know why. Just instinct, I suppose. He was standing on the bridge, alone, smoking. I called him. He ignored me. Poirot watched her closely. And you approached? I did. I touched his arm. He flinched like I was fired, told me to leave, that it was already in motion. He looked hollow, like someone who'd already said goodbye. Trench narrowed his eyes. You didn't tell us this before. I was afraid, Nadine whispered. I didn't want to become a suspect. I thought he'd show up eventually. He always had before. Poirot sat back, fingers steepled. You returned to your car? Yes. I watched him walk toward the centre of the bridge, then I drove away. Did you see anyone else nearby? Hear anything unusual? She shook her head. No, just the wind, and that dreadful silence. Trench leaned toward Poirot. She lied. Withheld information. Bracelet's a link. She's hiding something. Poirot did not disagree, at least not outwardly, but he remained quiet, his mind racing behind still eyes. Later that morning, Poirot requested the constable detain Nadine temporarily for further questioning. The official report would describe her as a person of significant interest. The household reacted as expected. Viola Hargrave's response was chillingly measured. I never trusted her, she said. She fed Caleb's delusions. Leo Barrington, on the other hand, looked genuinely troubled. She's many things, but a murderer. That seems too theatrical, even for her. Estelle Warwick was harder to read. Her eyes glittered, but her voice remained neutral. She'll say anything to avoid blame. Poirot took in each response with quiet interest. Truth was not in what they said, but what they revealed about themselves. That afternoon, Poirot requested access to the Hargrave family archives, ledgers, diaries, correspondence. Viola granted it, though not without a withering look that suggested she considered the effort both intrusive and futile. In the archives, Poirot discovered something curious. A handwritten sheet of music tucked into an old leather-bound folio titled Compositions, CH. The melody was haunting, half-finished. The top corner bore one word, Fidèle. But it was the note beside it that chilled him. To be, played once, then destroyed. He stared at it for a long time. A warning, a secret, a confession in melody? Poirot rose and replaced the folio carefully. There was more here. More than betrayal or jealousy or romantic despair. This was a story written in layered keys, and Nadine's involvement, while troubling, felt too rehearsed. Non, he whispered. This is not the final movement. That evening a call came through from the forensics department. The bracelet bore traces of the river algae, yet no blood, no skin residue, and crucially no signs of water damage on the interior clasp. It wasn't worn when it was submerged, Poirot murmured. He stood silently for a long moment, then smiled. Very faintly. The first suspect had emerged. Conveniently. Too conveniently, which meant the real game had just begun. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke that evening. first as a thin drizzle, then a steady downpour that softened the air and veiled the hills. The hall's windows shimmered with droplets, distorting the view of the mist-cloaked gardens like a painting smudged by grief. Poirot stood by the library hearth, his reflection wavering in the window-pane, a solitary figure among the shadows of Hargrave Hall. He had declined supper, claiming le petit estomac did not permit indulgence amid such psychological clutter. Instead, he asked for a fresh pot of coffee, 2 eggs hard-boiled precisely for 12 minutes, and silence. It was the silence he prized most now, for it was in the silences that people betrayed themselves. A soft knock at the door. Viola Hargrave. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, stepping into the room with an elegance sharpened by discipline. "You've had Nadine taken in. I suppose congratulations are in order?" Poirot offered a smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Ah, madam, you misunderstand. I do not play to win. I play to understand." She tilted her head, spoken like someone uncertain of his conclusion. "On the contrary, I grow more certain by the hour. It is merely the identity of the performer that remains in question. The composition, you see, is clear." Viola frowned slightly. "What composition?" Poirot moved toward the bookshelf, lifting the leather-bound folio he had earlier examined. "Your brother's music. He was composing something called Fidèle. Do you know it?" A flicker, barely there, but Poirot noted it. "I recall the title," she said coolly. "Something he noodled with in the early spring, never finished it. Yet he annotated it. To be played once, then destroyed." Viola's brow furrowed. "That sounds like Caleb." "But why such drama, madame? Unless the piece was not music, but message." She laughed lightly. "You ascribe too much meaning to everything. Caleb was a romantic. That sort of language was his currency." "Perhaps," Poirot said, closing the folio gently. "But I have found that artists often leave clues where words fail them." He let the silence stretch. Viola did not flinch. That, in itself, told Poirot much. Later that night, Poirot summoned Leo Barrington to the conservatory, where the storm clattered softly against the glass panes above. Leo arrived with a whisky in hand, the smell of tobacco clinging to his sleeves. "You wish to speak?" he asked, voice wary but polite. "I wish to listen," Poirot replied. "You're close to Caleb Hargrave, yes?" Leo's brows rose. "Was. We studied together, debated art, politics, drank far too much brandy in our 20s, drifted a little since he returned from the continent, but yes, I suppose you could say we remained friends." "Did he confide in you recently?" Leo hesitated, then gave a slight nod. He was troubled, felt something was closing in. A reckoning, he called it. Said he'd burned too many bridges. "Did he name anyone?" "No," Leo said, swirling his drink. "But he kept mentioning a man, someone from Paris. Said he'd come to collect. I thought it was metaphorical, or narcotic-induced." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Narcotic?" Leo sighed. "Caleb experimented. Nothing heavy, not for long, but in Paris, he dabbled. He said it opened his creative faculties." "Did he mention a name?" "Only a nickname. Le Revenant. The ghost." Poirot stood slowly. "And you did not think this was worth mentioning sooner?" Leo's face reddened slightly. "I thought it was madness, or drama. Caleb loved to court chaos." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, but perhaps he courted something that eventually answered." Back in his rooms, Poirot laid out everything on the writing desk. The matchbook with Fidèle scribbled inside, the unfinished composition, the bracelet, and now this new element. Le Revenant. A man, a persona, or a metaphor. Something was not aligning. Nadine's bracelet had been planted, certainly, but if not by her, then by someone with knowledge of her relationship to Caleb, and someone who believed it would mean something when found. Someone who needed her to be seen as culpable. And then there was the music, always the music. He turned to the piano in the corner of the drawing room. Quietly, carefully, Poirot played the first few notes of Fidèle from memory. A discordant progression, followed by a gentle, resolving cadence. It was not just a composition, it was a cipher, a message in sound. He played it again and again. On the 4th attempt, he noticed something. The chords, if read vertically as note patterns rather than as harmonies, translated into a simple sequence. Letters. Poirot jotted them down. AFDEELI. An anagram. Fidèle. Of course. but there was one note that didn't fit. A, not part of the word. For Anatole? Poirot's eyes widened. Viola's former tutor. The man who had left suddenly, mysteriously after Caleb's return. A man who had once been mentioned in a whisper by Estelle Warwick, who had let slip a bitter phrase. The ghost in this house always had a name. Le Revenant. The ghost. Was Anatole the key? Poirot turned toward the firelight. Somewhere in this house, the performance was entering its crescendo, and Hercule Poirot, modest, meticulous, unassuming, was preparing to take the conductor's stand. Chapter 8. Shadows of the Past. The night had deepened, and Hargrave Hall stood as silent as the grave, its intricate windows reflecting only the occasional glimmer of distant lightning. Poirot, however, found himself far from the tranquillity of his study. His mind, stirred and racing, was preoccupied with the revelation that had come so unexpectedly. The mysterious Le Revenant was not just a figment of Caleb's imagination, nor a harmless metaphor. The name pointed directly towards someone who had long since vanished from the Hargrave world, yet whose shadow seemed to have quietly returned. Anatole, the ghost of the past. Poirot's thoughts circled the name. He had heard it before, only in passing. A former tutor of the Hargrave children, someone who had gone away years ago after a vague, unresolved departure. At the time, no one had spoken much of Anatole, but the bitterness with which some spoke of him lingered. A certain unease had always surrounded the mention of his name, though nobody had ever outright stated why. But now, the melody, Fidèle, has unlocked something deeper. The return of Anatole was more than a memory. It was a warning. Poirot sat still in the soft glow of the firelight. His eyes narrowed. Anatole had been connected to the house, to the family, in ways he could not yet fully fathom. And yet, one thing was clear. This was no coincidence. The appearance of the bracelet, the carefully planted clues, the constant references to ghosts, everything led to one person. Poirot's deduction was simple. Someone believed the past would reveal itself, and someone, perhaps too arrogantly, believed they had control of it. The next morning, Poirot gathered the household once more. The atmosphere was heavy, the house's very walls seemingly holding their breath. He had ordered Constable Trench to bring the relevant files concerning Anatole's departure, as well as any correspondence connected to him. The past, it seemed, was inextricably tangled with the present. Viola Hargrave was the first to arrive in the sitting room, her eyes sharp, the mask of aristocratic composure barely hiding her inner turmoil. She had the look of someone on the brink of admitting to something they had long hoped to forget. "Poirot," she said, voice cold but steady, "I assume you have your answer by now." Poirot offered her a tight smile. "Ah, madame, I have many answers, but not all are as clear as one might hope. I must, however, ask you, what can you tell me of Anatole?" Her eyes flickered, a brief, involuntary gesture, but she quickly masked it. "Anatole? A man who was once part of the household. A tutor, yes. He left suddenly, under unfortunate circumstances. He failed Caleb, I suppose?" "Failed?" Poirot asked, leaning forward slightly. "In what way?" Viola hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. Caleb had begun to change, to question everything. Anatole was a force, a radical influence. He pushed Caleb too far, made him question the family. It became unsustainable. Poirot studied her intently. "And the failure was not just with Caleb?" Viola's lips pressed into a thin line. "Anatole didn't respect our family. He took liberties, and I—" Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat and continued. "I had no choice but to ask him to leave." Poirot nodded slowly. "How long ago was this?" 5 years, she said firmly, though there was something in her tone that suggested the years were not as distant as she wished. "And since then?" Poirot asked. Viola looked away, her gaze shifting toward the window. "Nothing. He never contacted us again, never returned. We tried to forget him." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "And now he returns, under different guises. Le Revenant." Viola stiffened. "Are you suggesting Anatole has returned to harass us, after all this time?" Poirot stood, slowly pacing, his fingers steepled as he thought aloud. "You see, madame, this is the nature of the game. When a man like Anatole leaves a place, he does not always leave quietly. He leaves a mark, and those marks, those impressions, linger. His name echoes in the mind like a broken chord, and when it is recalled, those who hear it tremble. But Anatole is not a ghost. He is a man of flesh, of ambition. He paused by the piano. And it is not just Caleb who was affected by him, is it? There were others in this house who knew him, perhaps better than they admit. Viola's face tightened. I won't allow you to drag my family's name through the mud, Poirot. Poirot turned, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. You misunderstand, madame. I seek only the truth, the whole truth, and perhaps you do not wish to remember it, but your own mind might betray you. Poirot did not wait for further conversation. Instead, he made his way to the small study where Estelle Warwick had been reading in solitude. She looked up as he entered, her posture defensive, but she said nothing. Mademoiselle Warwick, Poirot began. You knew Anatole, yes? She stiffened, but did not deny it. Yes, he taught me for a time. He was difficult, but brilliant. We were close. Close, Poirot repeated, his eyes sharp. She looked away, her fingers clutching the edge of her book tightly. He was a friend of Caleb's at first, but then things changed. What changed? Anatole. He wasn't just a tutor. He had ideas. Radical ideas. He wasn't satisfied with just teaching. He wanted to change things, and Caleb started to believe him. It was all too much. Poirot's gaze darkened. And you? Estelle swallowed, her voice quiet. I thought he was dangerous, but I was drawn to him. I thought if I could help him, I could fix things. But when Caleb started pulling away from everything, when Anatole left, I just wanted to forget. Forget, Poirot echoed. It seems many here wish to forget. But that is not possible, mademoiselle. Estelle's face was pale now. What do you mean? I mean, Poirot said gently, that the past never stays buried. Not forever. It calls out to those who have wronged it. Poirot's suspicions had reached their apex. The web he had been meticulously unravelling was beginning to take shape. Anatole's presence was not an accident. His departure, his return, the people involved, they were all connected. The time had come for the final piece to fall into place, but there was still one more thread to pull. Chapter 9. The Final Piece. The air had grown colder as evening crept upon Hargrave Hall once more. The autumn wind sighed through the gaps in the window panes, rattling them gently, like fingers tapping an impatient rhythm. Poirot stood alone in the music room examining the Steinway grand piano again, the black lacquered surface gleaming under the muted lamplight. The melody that Caleb had played the night of his disappearance still echoed faintly in Poirot's memory. Fidèle. A haunting tune, chosen not by chance. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a folded page, its corners softened from frequent handling. It was a handwritten note, retrieved from among Caleb's things by Constable Trench that very morning. The paper bore a simple line of music in Anatole's neat script, bars from Fidèle, accompanied by a cryptic phrase scribbled underneath in French. Celui qui suit la musique retrouve la vérité. He who follows the music will find the truth. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Not metaphorical, literal. The message was Anatole's, and now it was time to follow where it led. He called for Mrs. Fielding, the housekeeper, who responded with the swiftness of someone long used to answering without question. Madame, Poirot asked, has anything changed in the music room recently? Anything moved or kept hidden away? Mrs. Fielding looked startled. No, sir, not that I know of, but, well, the cleaning girls mentioned the wall panelling being strange near the left side of the room. One of them thought she heard something inside the wall, like a ticking. Poirot's brows rose. A ticking, you say? She nodded. Could be nothing. These walls are old. Poirot waited until she departed, then made his way to the left side of the piano and tapped gently along the panelling. After a few seconds, his fingers landed on a portion that felt subtly different, slightly hollow beneath the ornate wood grain. With careful pressure, he slid the panel aside, revealing a narrow cubbyhole behind the wall. Inside sat a velvet pouch, time-worn but intact. Poirot opened it with delicate precision. A small recorder, a notebook, and a photograph, faded, torn at the corner but unmistakable. It showed Caleb Hargrave, perhaps 5 years younger, with Anatole seated beside him. They appeared happy, but in the background, half obscured by the shadow of an arch, stood a third figure, Estelle Warwick. Poirot studied the image for a long moment, his heart beating faster. The past was beginning to speak, and it was not finished yet. Later that evening, Poirot requested the presence of both Estelle Warwick and Viola Hargrave in the drawing room. The fire was lit and the heavy curtains drawn tight. He placed the photograph gently upon the coffee table between them. Estelle gasped. Viola's lips drew into a hard, unforgiving line. "Where did you get this?" "In the wall," Poirot replied calmly. "Hidden, along with the recording. Shall I play it?" Estelle's voice trembled. "No." Poirot turned to her. "Then perhaps, mademoiselle, you would prefer to speak before it speaks for you." Estelle looked down, eyes glistening. "I didn't know he still had that photo. I thought he destroyed it." "You and Anatole were lovers," Poirot said softly, "weren't you?" Estelle nodded, defeated. "Yes, but it wasn't just a romance. Anatole believed in exposing the hypocrisy of the Hargraves. Caleb had grown to hate the family legacy. He wanted to run from it, and Anatole, he encouraged that. I tried to stop it. I was young, foolish." Viola cut in sharply. "You betrayed this family. I knew there was something twisted about that man." Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. Anatole was a symptom, not the cause. The real question, madame, is what drove him to hide this recording." He placed the device on the table and pressed play. Crackling filled the room, followed by Anatole's voice, clear and deliberate. "If this is heard, it means I have failed. Caleb is in danger, not from me, but from within. The truth about the trust fund, about his father's letters, about Viola's control, it all must come to light. If I disappear, look to the bridge. That is where it ends." Poirot stopped the tape. The silence that followed was thunderous. Viola looked pale. "He's lying. It's a fabrication. Caleb was troubled." Poirot's gaze pierced her. "Ah, madame, but you see, now the bridge is no longer a metaphor. It is a place, a very real place." She stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "You think I—" "What? Killed Caleb? Hide him? Why would I do such a thing?" Poirot stepped forward, calm but implacable. "To protect the Hargrave name, to keep the trust fund under your control. Anatole knew you had forged your late husband's signature to retain full access after Caleb turned 21. The letters that Caleb was never allowed to see, Anatole was going to show him, and that, madame, is when everything began to unravel." Viola's silence confirmed more than any words could. Poirot turned toward Estelle. "Mademoiselle, you say you tried to stop Anatole. Did you also try to warn Caleb?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "I sent him a letter. I begged him not to meet Anatole that night. I didn't want him dragged into another scheme." Poirot folded his arms. "Then you must understand. You're one of the last people to see Caleb before he vanishes." As the evening waned, Poirot felt the end approaching. He knew the pieces now, the betrayal, the hidden truths, the intersection of past passion and present manipulation. But the final step remained, the bridge. He would go there in the morning, and what he found would determine whether Caleb Hargrave was truly dead, or whether someone had simply tried very hard to erase him. Chapter 10. The Secrets at Dawn's Bridge. The next morning arrived cloaked in fog. The world beyond Hargrave Hall swaddled in grey mist. Poirot stepped out wrapped in his heavy overcoat, his cane tapping delicately along the stone steps. Constable Trench was waiting near the stables with a flask of tea and an anxious look on his face. "You're certain about this, sir?" Trench asked, glancing toward the river path. "It's been over a week. If there were anything to find, surely—" Poirot held up a gloved hand. "The bridge, mon ami. Not the water. The bridge itself holds the secret." They walked together in silence, their footsteps muffled by the damp grass. The path twisted downhill, through thinning woods, until at last the structure appeared. Dawn's Bridge. It arched low over the narrow river, old stone worn slick by time. The water beneath gurgled gently, innocent and indifferent. Poirot paused at the start of the bridge and looked carefully along the handrails, running his fingers over the mossy stone. Caleb was seen heading this way by a groundskeeper, but no one saw him return. Why would he come to a place like this, alone, unless summoned? Trench stepped beside him, scanning the surroundings. "There's no sign of struggle, nothing disturbed." "Because the crime," Poirot murmured, "if indeed there was one of silence, of concealment, not violence. He knelt slowly and examined the underside of the stone ledge. Then, with surprising strength and precision, he tapped the heel of his cane along a crack just beneath a section of balustrade. There was a soft click. A sliver of stone shifted. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, "just as I suspected." A hidden compartment only inches deep opened. Inside was a small metal box, locked but not rusted. Poirot pried it open with Trench's help. Inside were 4 items: a silver pendant, a crumpled photograph, a sealed envelope, and a small battered USB drive. Poirot turned the pendant over. "Viola's initials," he murmured. "Given to Caleb, perhaps, in childhood. A token of familial loyalty or control." He glanced at the photograph, which showed Caleb as a teenager, standing on this very bridge with Anatole Mercier. Behind them, further down the path, a third figure approached, obscured but tall, male, and bearded, unmistakably recent. Poirot studied it for a long time. Taken during a secret meeting, Estelle was wrong. Anatole did return, but he was not alone. They returned swiftly to Hargrave Hall. Poirot requested the use of Lord Hargrave's study, where Trench retrieved a laptop from the constabulary vehicle. The USB drive, once connected, revealed a single audio file. Poirot pressed play. A conversation began, muffled at first, then clearer. "Caleb, you shouldn't have come back." "Anatole, you summoned me." "Caleb, I needed answers, not a resurrection." Unknown voice. "You both talk too much." A loud thump followed, a scuffle, then silence. The recording ended. Poirot sat back, brow furrowed. "A third voice," he said, unmistakably male, and known to them both. Trench's face had gone pale. "You think that's when it happened? When Caleb—" Poirot raised a hand. "Non, I think this was the interruption. Caleb may still have escaped, or hidden, or been taken." He opened the sealed envelope. Inside, a handwritten note dated 3 days before the performance. "If anything happens to me, the truth lies in the trust records, the letters Viola keeps locked away, and the performances Anatole once claimed as his. I have left breadcrumbs, but you must look beyond the stage. Forgive me." Siege Poirot folded the letter carefully. The picture was almost complete. There was misappropriated music, buried family secrets, and now, proof that someone had intercepted a meeting between Caleb and Anatole. But who? Back inside the drawing room, Poirot summoned Viola, Estelle, and Edmund Langley. "I have been to the bridge," Poirot announced, "and I have found what someone hoped would remain lost." Viola paled. Estelle looked as if she might cry. Langley, for once, dropped his affected smile. Poirot held up the pendant and photograph. Caleb had begun to uncover the depth of betrayal surrounding him. He feared Viola's control, Anatole's resurfacing, and perhaps most of all, the consequences of becoming his own man, his own artist. Poirot then turned his gaze to Edmund. "Tell me, monsieur, where were you on the night Caleb vanished?" Langley stiffened. "I've told you. I was in the village, at the pub." Poirot tilted his head. "Strange, then, that no one at the pub recalls seeing you. And stranger still that your voice matches the tone and cadence of the third man on the audio." Langley flushed. "Are you accusing me?" "I am pointing out that you stood to lose much, should Caleb sever ties with you as his manager. You were cut out of his future tour plans. He had begun negotiating independently. That, coupled with your mounting debts, paints a dangerous motive." Langley stammered, but before he could reply, Estelle stepped forward. "It wasn't all Edmund's doing. He and I, we both knew about Viola's forged letters. We tried to scare Caleb into silence. But Anatole's return changed everything. Caleb was going to expose all of us." Poirot turned slowly. "Then perhaps you would both like to accompany me to the local constable's office. I believe further conversation must be conducted, officially." As the Hargraves' world began to unravel, Poirot returned to the study once more. The final question still lingered in the air. Where was Caleb? Alive or dead? Victim or fugitive? His presence remained, haunting the halls of Hargrave Hall like a note left unresolved, and Poirot, the maestro of deduction, would not leave until every note rang clear. Chapter 11. The Return of the Prodigal Son. The knock came just after dusk. Hargrave Hall was in disarray. Viola had retreated to her music room in silence. Edmund Langley and Estelle were being held under constabulary guard in the east wing, and Lord Hargrave had taken to pacing in tight, anxious loops in his study, pipe clenched but unlit. Poirot, seated near the fireplace in the drawing-room, looked up as Constable Trench entered, his face a picture of disbelief. "There's someone here to see you, sir," Trench said, his voice unsteady. "You won't believe it." Poirot stood, smoothing his waistcoat. "Try me, mon ami. I have spent my life cultivating the art of believing the unbelievable." Trench stepped aside, and there he was, thin, pale, with clothes muddied and a faint tremble in his limbs, but unmistakable. "Caleb Hargrave," Poirot said softly, "you have come home." The young man gave a weak smile, eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and fear. "You always said I'd have to face the music some day." Poirot motioned him in. "Sit, monsieur. Rest. But first, speak. Where have you been?" Caleb slumped into an armchair. "Not far. I've been hiding in the caretaker's cottage on the far side of the estate. It's abandoned but dry. I knew no one would think to check there, not while they assumed I'd gone missing or fled abroad." Poirot folded his hands. Why the charade? Why the silence? Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because I needed time. I didn't trust anyone. Not Edmund, not Estelle, not even my mother. I knew Anatole was coming back. He'd written to me, threatening exposure, said he'd kept copies of everything he'd composed under my name, but it was never just about plagiarism. It was about the legacy. My mother orchestrated the deception from the beginning. I just played along, until I couldn't anymore." Poirot nodded solemnly. "And you met Anatole, on the bridge?" "Yes," Caleb said, "but someone else came too. Langley. I don't know how he found out, but he did. He tried to intercept the meeting, claimed he could smooth things over, but he and Anatole nearly came to blows." Poirot interjected gently. "And Anatole? What happened to him after that?" "Night?" Caleb looked away. "He left. Said he had proof. Said he'd reveal it to the press unless I made a public statement acknowledging him as the composer. I panicked. I didn't want to return to the hall. I didn't trust what Langley or Estelle might do if they knew Anatole had gone public. So I disappeared." "And left your family to think you had been harmed." Caleb's face twisted in shame. "I didn't expect them to report me missing. I thought they'd assume I'd gone to Paris or gone off the grid to avoid scandal. But when I heard that Anatole had died," Poirot held up a finger, "he has not. He is merely in hiding, much like you. It was Estelle who lied about his death to muddy the trail. But the time for secrecy has passed, monsieur. Your return changes the game, and it is time you faced your accusers and your allies." An hour later, Viola Hargrave stood in the music room, clutching the edge of the grand piano for support as Caleb stepped into view. Her breath caught in her throat. "Caleb," she whispered, you're alive." "I never stopped being alive, Mother," he said softly. "Only hidden." The moment between them crackled with a strange electricity, grief, resentment, love, all braided into silence. Poirot stepped between them. "Madame, your son has returned not to accuse but to resolve. But resolution, like music, requires honesty, and now I must insist upon it." Viola looked away, eyes shining. "I did what I thought best, for him, for the family. Anatole was volatile, dangerous," Poirot's gaze narrowed, "and talented. Much of what Caleb performed was not his own. You saw a way to maintain the Hargrave legacy and took it. But at what cost?" Caleb answered for her. "At the cost of my self-respect, my name, everything." Poirot gestured toward the drawing-room, where Langley and Estelle sat under guard. "And the others? They were merely tools in the game?" Viola closed her eyes. Estelle helped forge the letters Anatole supposedly wrote threatening Caleb. Edmund orchestrated the media silence, controlled Caleb's image. It was all smoke and mirrors, but it worked. Until now. Poirot took a deep breath. Now the world must see the truth. The plagiarized works must be acknowledged, the trust reviewed, and those responsible held accountable. But there is still time to salvage dignity. Redemption, Madame Hargrave, begins with confession. Viola stepped forward and took her son's hand. "Then I will confess. To the trustees, to the press. I'll do whatever it takes." Caleb squeezed her hand. The years of manipulation softened, if not erased, by the gesture. Poirot inclined his head. "Bon. Then perhaps the final act shall not be a tragedy." That evening, as rain tapped gently at the windows, Poirot and Trench sat in the library, a modest fire flickering between them. You really think this will hold, sir? Trench asked. The family? Coming clean, Caleb returning? Poirot sipped his tisane. The truth, like a note held too long, must eventually resolve, and like all great symphonies, this one ends not with a crash, but with a silence that says everything. He looked out toward the darkened grounds where the bridge still stood, quiet and watchful. There are some disappearances, he said softly, that lead not to endings, but to beginnings. Chapter 12. The Legacy of Silence. The dawn broke over Hargrave Hall with a quiet dignity, the storm of recent nights replaced by a low mist that curled around the yew hedges like forgotten whispers. Within the drawing-room, Poirot stood by the tall windows, hands behind his back, observing the grey light filter in through the panes. The estate had been a theatre of deceptions, yet even now the grand old house held its secrets tight to its chest. Caleb Hargrave had been given a room under light constabulary watch, though Poirot had insisted it was for his protection rather than imprisonment. Viola had not slept. She had instead composed, furiously, unrelentingly, at the grand piano in the music room through the long night. What she wrote, no one could yet say. It was nearly 10 when Chief Inspector Barnes arrived, his boots muddied from the walk up the drive, and his mood clearly soured by the news awaiting him. "Poirot!" he barked without greeting. "Is it true? Hargrave's son just walks back into the picture, and we're to pretend the entire estate hasn't been running a criminal racket of forged music, buried bodies, and manipulated trust funds." Poirot turned, smiling gently. "Ah, mon cher Barnes, always so full of fire. But I ask you, what would you prefer? That we discover a corpse? That an innocent man rot in jail while the guilty sip champagne?" Barnes grumbled. "What I'd prefer is a confession. Something hard. Evidence." Poirot nodded toward a small table by the settee. Upon it lay a sheaf of parchment sheets, handwritten, heavily marked, and stamped with the Hargrave crest. "You will find Madame Hargrave has taken your request quite to heart. That is her sworn statement, accompanied by Caleb's and even one from Anatole Rousseau, who, I might add, is very much alive and currently on his way to London under protective escort." Barnes blinked. "Alive?" "I thought—" "Estelle lied," Poirot said mildly, "as part of a plan to provoke Caleb into surfacing. But it was a dangerous game. Fortunately, no one has died. Not yet." Barnes's brow furrowed. "You still think someone might?" Poirot looked away. "Secrets have a way of turning poisonous, mon ami, especially when pride clings to them." Elsewhere in the house, Estelle Wyndham stood before a mirror in one of the guest bedrooms, smoothing down the collar of her blouse. Her hands trembled, her expression strained and haggard. The game was up. She'd been outmanoeuvred, yet part of her still held tight to defiance. A knock came. She didn't answer. Poirot entered anyway, quiet as a sigh. "Mademoiselle Wyndham." She turned slowly. "I suppose you've come to enjoy your triumph." "Non," he said gently. "I have come because I believe there is more to be said. You and Edmund Langley were not merely accomplices. You were architects, but not of malice, of fear." Estelle's shoulders tensed. "You think that makes it better?" "No," he said, "but it makes it human." She sank into a chair. "We were trying to protect a legacy. Hargrave's music was revered across Europe. If the truth had come out, if it had been exposed that his heir was a fraud, the estate would have crumbled. Donors, patrons, the trust, they would have fled." Poirot tilted his head. "So you invented a genius. You crafted the illusion that Caleb was composing in secret while Anatole remained conveniently forgotten. But illusions, mademoiselle, do not weather time well." Estelle gave a bitter laugh. "We never imagined Anatole would return. We thought he drowned somewhere in Marseille, bitter and broken, but he came back, and he wanted everything." Poirot raised a brow. "Including revenge?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "No. He wanted credit, vindication. He said he didn't care about money, but when Edmund offered him a portion of the estate's profits to stay silent, Anatole refused. That's when Edmund turned desperate." "Did Edmund harm him?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Estelle hesitated. "No. Just followed him. Threatened him. But Anatole was clever. He disappeared again, this time of his own accord, and we panicked. I told Edmund to stage the death. It would draw Caleb back, force a confrontation before things spiralled out further." Poirot considered this. You played with dangerous fictions, mademoiselle, and now they must be unravelled. Estelle looked up, eyes haunted. Do you think the Hargrave name can survive this? Poirot gave a small, thoughtful smile. Names are curious things. They don't survive because they are protected. They survive because they evolve. If Caleb steps forward, acknowledges Anatole publicly, takes the consequences with humility and grace, it may be the start of something more honest, more lasting. Estelle stared at him, then slowly nodded. By late afternoon, the Grand Salon was filled with an odd assembly. Viola Hargrave, pale but resolute. Caleb standing stiffly in a tailored jacket borrowed from one of the footmen. Inspector Barnes, arms crossed and sceptical, Trench with his notebook open, and Poirot at the centre, calm as the eye of a storm. I have called you all, Poirot began, because a legacy, once fractured, must be healed not in solitude, but in witness. He gestured to Caleb. Monsieur Hargrave has agreed to deliver a public statement, acknowledging Anatole Rousseau as the composer of several acclaimed works, including Nocturne in D, Minor and the Edge of Rainlight. Gasps echoed through the room. Poirot continued. Furthermore, the Hargrave Trust will establish a new musical initiative in Rousseau's name, dedicated to supporting young composers who, like him, go unrecognised. Viola spoke softly. It is the least we can do. Poirot nodded once. Justice is not always a courtroom, mes amis. Sometimes it is a stage, and on that stage the music must speak the truth. As the sun slipped lower behind the hills, Caleb stepped forward. His voice was clear. I was not the composer I was praised to be, but I will be one now, and I will do it under my name, no more shadows. Poirot smiled, his gaze distant, as if he heard the faint echo of a violin in the misty air. A beginning, at last. Chapter 13. Whispers from the Bridge. The gravel of the eastern path crunched beneath Poirot's carefully polished shoes as he made his way toward the old stone bridge that arched elegantly over the stream at the edge of Hargrave's estate. The mist still clung to the banks, silver tendrils coiling around the reeds like secrets trying to escape their confines. It was the same bridge from which Anatole Rousseau had supposedly vanished all those years ago, and now it was the place Poirot returned to, not to find a body, but something more intangible. Motive, memory, truth. He paused midway along the bridge and looked over the edge. The water moved gently below, dappled with faint light. You've been here before, haven't you? Came a voice behind him. Poirot turned slightly. Viola Hargrave stood several paces away, wrapped in a grey shawl, her face drawn and contemplative. Oui, mademoiselle, Poirot said. Twice now. Once when I first arrived, and again now, when the fog has begun to lift. She came closer, resting her hand lightly on the parapet. I used to come here with Anatole, she said quietly, before it all became so twisted. He would sketch notes on his sleeve with a bit of graphite and hum to the water. Poirot's gaze moved to her carefully. You loved him? She nodded. I think I did. I think part of me still does. But it was complicated. Caleb and I were to be married, arranged by our families, of course, and Anatole. He was the ghost that hovered in every note we played. Poirot gave a soft smile. It was not merely music he gave to this house. It was on fire, and fire, mademoiselle, can warm or destroy. Viola turned her face to him, searching his eyes. Do you think I knew about the deception, that Caleb wasn't composing the music? Poirot studied her. I think you suspected, but you were told a version of the truth wrapped in necessity. It is easier to believe when you are told it is to protect the legacy of your father and your future. She was quiet for a moment. You know, when Anatole left, he sent me one letter. Just one. I never opened it. Poirot tilted his head. Why not? Because I was afraid of what it would say, afraid it would change everything I had agreed to become. She reached into her shawl and produced a small envelope, aged and brittle at the edges. I kept it, all these years. Poirot extended a hand. May I? She hesitated, then gave it to him. He opened it delicately, his fingers precise. The note inside was written in a hurried, elegant script. The ink had faded slightly but was still legible. Poirot read aloud. Viola. They are trying to bury me, but I refuse to be the ghost they want. I go now, not in shame, but in defiance. One day the music will find you again, and then you will know. Not who I was, but who you are. Yours, always, A. Viola turned away, blinking fast. He was never cruel, just too bright for this place. Poirot folded the letter carefully and handed it back. And yet he returned. Not for vengeance, but for recognition. That is rare. A rustle in the trees behind them caught both their attention. Inspector Barnes emerged, his coat unbuttoned and expression taut. "Poirot," he said tersely, "we've found something. In the cellar, hidden behind a false wall. Looks like Langley was storing more than just vintage wine." Viola looked sharply at Poirot. "What now?" Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Now, mademoiselle, we return to the house. The bridge has told us what it could, but the cellar may still have more to whisper." The narrow staircase leading into Hargrave Hall's wine cellar groaned under their descent. The air was thick with dampness and something else, dust and time. Barnes led the way, lifting a lantern high. Behind a collapsed shelf of old champagne crates, a sliver of stone wall jutted out at an unnatural angle. Someone had pried it loose. Behind it, a cavity no larger than a wardrobe, dark and cold. Inside they found a wooden chest, not ornate but sturdy. Poirot opened it with care. Inside were bound manuscripts, each marked in a precise hand. Rousseau, 1939. Rousseau, 1940. And beneath them, a small collection of letters, correspondence between Langley and various European music publishers. Barnes read aloud, frowning. "The pieces will be presented under the Hargrave name. No mention of the original composer. Payment will be routed through the trust." "Bloody hell!" Poirot gave a slow nod. "The extent of the deception is wider than we knew. Langley was not only passing off Rousseau's work as Caleb's, but profiting from it through international sales. The estate was laundering the music like stolen art." Barnes cursed. "This changes everything." "Oui," Poirot agreed, eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "But it also solidifies the motive. Langley was protecting more than a legacy. He was protecting a criminal enterprise." Viola stood in stunned silence. "How many people knew?" Poirot replied softly. "Fewer than you fear, but more than you would hope." He looked down at the chest, then at the pale stone around them. "The truth, Mademoiselle Hargrave, is like a melody buried beneath dissonance, but now it begins to play." Chapter 14. The Composer's Last Note. Back in the drawing room of Hargrave Hall the air had shifted. Gone was the polite pretense of calm, now replaced by something sharper, more fragile. The discovery in the cellar had sent quiet tremors through the household, and as Poirot sat once more in the wide armchair, he surveyed each face with the meticulous eye of a surgeon before an incision. Langley Hargrave, pale and rigid, sat opposite him like a relic out of joint with the time around him. Inspector Barnes stood to the side, arms folded, watching. Viola leaned against the window frame, fingers twitching at her sleeve, her expression unreadable. "I imagine you wish to explain, Monsieur Hargrave," Poirot said, his voice gentle but edged. Langley didn't answer at once. He looked to his niece, then to Barnes. Finally his gaze settled on Poirot. "It was never meant to go this far," he said quietly. "Not at first." Poirot nodded. That is often the refrain of men who fall slowly, inch by inch, into the chasm of deceit. Langley exhaled. "Anatole was brilliant. That much is undeniable. But he had no grasp of legacy, no sense of permanence. He would abandon a symphony on a whim, leaving a sonata to collect dust for years." "And so you decided," Poirot said, "to immortalize him on your own terms?" "No," Langley snapped. "I decided to protect this family, to protect Caleb, my brother's name, his ambitions. You cannot imagine what it meant to keep Hargrave relevant in those years." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet it was not just the reputation you were securing. You were selling the work abroad, quietly, lucratively." Langley stiffened. "It paid for the renovations, for the summer concert tours, even the hospital wing in Viola's mother's name." Viola spoke up now, her voice like cracking ice. "And Anatole? What did he get? A ruined name? A forged disappearance?" Langley turned toward her. "He left. He walked out." Poirot's brows rose. "But he returned, did he not? He came back when you invited him, under the pretense of reconciliation." "He wanted credit," Langley said through clenched teeth. "He threatened to go to the press, to shame us all. You don't understand what it would have done." Poirot raised a hand. "No, monsieur, it is you who does not understand. This theft of identity, of artistry, is a crime not only of law, but of soul," Barnes interjected. "Let's be clear, Mr. Hargrave. We have evidence tying you to decades of fraud, and that chest downstairs will likely interest several international prosecutors." Langley sat back, defeated. "But Anatole vanished," Poirot said, turning now to Barnes, "and that, mes amis, is the question still unanswered." The room fell into silence. Poirot rose and walked slowly to the sideboard, examining the family photos there. He picked up one, an old black-and-white portrait of a young Caleb, Langley, and a much younger Viola. "There is something peculiar about guilt, Inspector," Poirot said. "It is not always shared equally." He turned to face the others again. "Mademoiselle Viola, if you would indulge me, where were you the evening Anatole disappeared?" Viola blinked. I was in my room. Caleb and I had argued earlier. He wanted to confront Langley about the deception. He said he couldn't live with the lie anymore, but he never got the chance." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the next morning, Anatole was gone. And you, mademoiselle, you did not seem surprised." Viola's lips parted slightly. "I thought perhaps he had changed his mind, that he'd gone back to Paris." Poirot moved closer, his voice lowering. "Or did you help him leave? Perhaps even arranged it?" A silence stretched thin across the room. "I did," she said at last. "I helped him pack. I gave him money from my own savings, told him to go, to escape before the scandal crushed him." Langley muttered, "You never told me this." Viola's eyes flared. "Would you have let him go if I had? You would have kept him here, forced him into silence, just like you forced Caleb." Poirot gave a slight nod. "And yet, he did not escape. He never reached Paris." Viola's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Poirot stepped back, his expression grave. "I believe Anatole never made it beyond this estate, that he was intercepted." Langley's jaw twitched. "That's preposterous." "No," Poirot said gently. "It is very precise and very probable." Barnes stepped forward. "Do you have a theory, Poirot?" "I have more than a theory, mon ami. I have the shape of truth. It only remains to find the one detail that will give it colour." He turned back to Langley. "Someone in this house knew Anatole planned to go. Someone who had everything to lose if he spoke." Langley said nothing, but his knuckles whitened against the armrest of his chair. Poirot moved to the fireplace and stared into the cold grate. "Murder," he said softly, "is often thought of as passion's child. But in this case, it is the bureaucracy's orphan. It was a matter of paperwork, of reputation, of control." Poirot turned, his voice low but steady. "I believe Anatole Rousseau was murdered, and I believe his body is still somewhere on this estate." Barnes stiffened. Viola gasped audibly. Poirot's eyes swept over them. "And now we must find him, not only to deliver justice, but to unmask the killer whose secret has lived in the shadows far too long." Chapter 15. Beneath the Hargrave Soil. A leaden hush gripped Hargrave Hall as dusk seeped into the drawing-room's corners, thickening like the secrets that lingered between the antique walls. Poirot stood, unmoving before the empty fireplace, his eyes distant as if reconstructing a ghost's final steps. Inspector Barnes cleared his throat. "Are you saying we should dig up the entire grounds on a hunch, Monsieur Poirot?" "Non, non," Poirot replied, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. "Your English is so literal, always thinking in acres and shovels. But sometimes, mon cher, what is buried is not always under the earth. It may be hidden beneath memory, or tucked behind an error no one noticed." He walked to the writing desk and retrieved the estate's floor plans, which had earlier been presented during the cellar investigation. He unfolded them slowly, smoothing them on the table. Langley watched, stony-faced, while Viola moved nearer, her face pale but composed. Poirot tapped the diagram of the music room. "This wing, yes? The old wing, which had the renovations funded. How did you say? By Anatole's accidental success?" Langley said nothing. Poirot pointed to a wall drawn thicker than the rest. "And yet curious. It is not quite symmetrical, no? On this side, there is an alcove that does not mirror the opposite wall. Tell me, Mademoiselle Viola, has there always been a window in that alcove?" She squinted. No, I don't believe so. In fact, I remember as a child wondering why the corner always felt so oddly shaped, like it hid something. Poirot's eyes glinted. Indeed, Barnes frowned. You're suggesting there's a concealed space? Poirot nodded. Let us not delay. Within minutes they moved to the music room. The air was close, tinged with varnish, faded parchment, and something older still. Poirot approached the far wall, the supposed alcove, and began tapping lightly with his knuckles. The third panel produced a muted, hollow thud. Barnes stepped forward. Stand back. He ran his fingers along the trim and found a slight seam. With Poirot's guidance, they pried it open to reveal a narrow crawl space beyond, just wide enough for a man to slip through on hands and knees. A stale draught greeted them, a breath of forgotten years. Viola covered her mouth. Mon Dieu! Barnes crouched and turned on his torch, illuminating the passage. Dust motes scattered. The beam landed on something crumpled, linen fabric discoloured with age, and bones. God help us, Barnes muttered. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. At last we have found him. Viola leaned into the wall, tears brimming but unfallen. Langley had sunk onto the piano bench, ashen and rigid. Barnes moved into the crawl space with gloves, flashlight and tape measure. After several tense minutes he emerged, grave. Human remains. Judging from the condition, they've been here for years. Male, slight frame. Likely Rousseau. Poirot nodded somberly. And now, the question is no longer what happened, but who ensured he never walked free? Langley lifted his gaze. You're accusing me, of course. Poirot tilted his head. Are you not accusing yourself? Langley looked away. No, I do not believe you killed him with your own hands, monsieur, though you bear great guilt. But the manner of concealment, it speaks of panic, not calculation, a crime of desperation, not long design. Viola's voice was barely audible. Who then? Poirot turned to her. Tell me, mademoiselle, who else knew Anatole planned to leave that night? She hesitated. Just me. I told no one. No, Poirot said. Someone overheard. He looked around the room. There was another player in this house, a silent one, always present yet rarely questioned. Poirot paced slowly. I speak, of course, of Mr. Oliver, the steward. Barnes blinked. The steward. He left Hargrave a year after Rousseau disappeared. Exactly, Poirot said. He knew of the fraud. He knew that Anatole's departure would expose the entire enterprise, and with it, end his comfortable post. He overheard Viola's conversation. He waited, and when Anatole attempted to leave, he intercepted him. Langley exhaled shakily. My God. Poirot turned to Barnes. You will find that Oliver's exit from the household aligns very conveniently with the renovations, those that sealed up the false alcove, no doubt funded by the last of the foreign commissions. Barnes pulled out his notebook, scribbling quickly. Poirot's voice softened. Langley, you believed you had merely silenced a scandal, but you were covering up a murder. I didn't know, he murmured. I thought he'd run, and when Oliver left I thought, perhaps the secret had gone with him. Poirot gave a faint sigh. But secrets, monsieur, do not die. They wait, until they are uncovered. Viola sat heavily in one of the music chairs, trembling. So that's it then. He never stood a chance. Poirot nodded. But now he may rest. The truth will give him that. Barnes closed his notebook. We'll issue a warrant for Oliver. He'll be found. Poirot looked around the room one last time, lingering on the faded music sheet still resting atop the grand piano. And once he is, he said quietly, the final note in this dreadful composition can be played. Chapter 16. The Arrest and the Eulogy. The morning broke with a chill that clung to the Hargrave estate like a lingering shadow. The air, though fresh, held the weight of revelations unearthed. The discovery of Anatole Rousseau's remains had cast a stillness over the house, an oppressive quiet that no birdsong could pierce. In the parlour, Poirot sipped his tisane thoughtfully, his gaze fixed out the tall window that overlooked the sloping lawn. Inspector Barnes stood nearby, straight-backed, his coat buttoned tight against the wind. A constable entered briskly and handed Barnes a telegram. He read it aloud. Oliver located, arrested this morning in Leeds, attempting to board a train under the name Edgar Lowry. Poirot set down his cup. As expected. When one's past emerges from the soil, There's always an urge to flee, but La Vérité runs swifter. Barnes glanced up. You believe he'll confess? Poirot raised his brows. Ah, but confession. It is not always necessary. There will be records of money exchanged during the renovations, his fingerprints in the sealed crawl space. And if you examine Rousseau's remains closely, I believe you shall find defensive wounds, signs of a struggle. It will tell a story, even if Monsieur Oliver chooses silence. Barnes nodded, grim. We'll get the full statement soon enough. Viola entered just then, dressed in muted blue. Her face was wan but composed. I heard the news, she said softly. They found him? Barnes nodded. Yes, Miss Hargrave. He'll be brought to London tonight. Charges will be filed immediately. Viola gave a slow nod, then turned to Poirot. May I have a moment with you, alone? Barnes gave a small nod and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Viola approached Poirot, her voice low. I keep wondering if I should have done more. That night, I should have warned Anatole. I should have insisted we leave together. Poirot's gaze was gentle but steady. Mademoiselle, guilt is the shadow of grief. It distorts the shape of your memories. You were young, frightened, and deceived by those you trusted. She shook her head. Still, he died trying to escape something I helped create. The lie, the theft of his music. Poirot rose and folded his hands behind his back. Anatole stayed because he believed in you. He thought he could protect you from the consequences of Langley's scheme. Perhaps he waited too long, but the choice was made out of love, not cowardice. She looked down, swallowing a tight breath. Will there be a funeral? Poirot nodded. I believe Inspector Barnes is arranging for the coroner to release the remains for a private burial. It is the least that can be done for one whose life was so artfully erased. Her voice broke slightly. Will you attend? I would be honoured, Poirot said quietly. 2 days later, under a steel-grey sky, a small group gathered at the Hargrave Chapel. The once abandoned building had been hastily cleared. The dust swept from the stone pews, a single violin resting atop the casket, its varnish dulled but whole. The case had been found hidden in the cellar behind a false wall, its contents untouched but neglected. Viola read a short poem Anatole had once scribbled in a letter to her, now yellowed and torn at the corners. Her voice trembled but never failed. Langley stood a short distance back from the others, his face drawn and distant. Poirot noticed him but said nothing. Justice had its paths, and Langley's would be through ruin, not prison. That was punishment enough for a man who had built his entire life on a foundation of theft and silence. After the service, Poirot approached the grave alone, looking down at the name etched onto the stone, Anatole Rousseau, 1902-1931. Composer, beloved, forgotten no more. He murmured, Enfin, mon ami, you have your name returned to you. Viola stood beside him, clutching the violin case tightly. I want to make his music known, she said, properly, with his name restored. That's all I can do. Poirot inclined his head. It will be the greatest justice. She looked toward the hall in the distance, its spires silhouetted against the horizon. I'm selling Hargrave. I can't stay. Too many ghosts. Poirot nodded. A wise decision. The past should be remembered, but not relived. They stood in silence a moment longer. The wind stirred gently, whispering through the trees like a faint melody. Poirot finally turned. And now, I must return to London. There are cases waiting, and Hastings grows restless in my absence. Viola smiled faintly. He would have liked you, you know. Anatole? He had great admiration for cleverness that came with kindness. Poirot allowed himself a rare, warm smile. Then I consider that the highest compliment. He tipped his hat. Adieu, mademoiselle. As Poirot walked away down the gravel path, the sky began to shift, just slightly, allowing a sliver of pale gold to pierce the clouds, a new dawn over Hargrave Hall. Chapter 17. Shadows Across the Score. 2 weeks had passed since Anatole Rousseau's modest burial, and the world, as it always does, resumed its rhythm. Yet for Hercule Poirot, there remained the sense of an unresolved chord, a final note not yet struck. He sat once again in his London flat, the fire low in the grate, a thick folder open on the table before him. Hastings, recently returned from a brief sojourn to Dorset, was standing by the sideboard pouring tea. "I still can't believe it," Hastings said, handing Poirot a cup. "A composer buried under his own floorboards while another man took credit for his music. Ghastly! It reads like a Russian tragedy." Poirot tapped his fingers against the table. "Mais oui, mon ami, it is indeed tragic. But you forget, it is also a puzzle, and I am not yet convinced we have accounted for every piece." Hastings paused. "But Oliver confessed, didn't he? Or at least admitted to the fight, the concealment. Barnes said he gave the full statement." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, but the fight. That is precisely the detail that vexes me. Oliver claimed Anatole grew violent, that he struck first, that it was self-defence. Yet the scene described does not align entirely with the evidence." Hastings frowned. "You think he was lying?" Poirot didn't answer immediately. He rose and walked to the mantel, gazing at the framed photo of a young couple in Paris, a souvenir from an old case. "When a man constructs a lie, mon ami, it often reveals more about his fear than his guilt. Oliver feared exposure, certainly, but I believe someone else feared something greater." There was a knock at the door. Poirot turned as Miss Lemon entered, holding a parcel. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Poirot. No return address, but the handwriting is careful, almost rehearsed." Poirot took the package, unwrapped it gently and opened the slim, leather-bound folder inside. Hastings leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Sheet music?" he asked. Poirot smiled thinly. "Indeed, an original composition, untitled, but look here." He pointed to the top of the page where, in delicate pencil, was scribbled a date, November 3rd, 1931. "That's the night Rousseau died," Hastings whispered. Poirot nodded. "And this?" He turned to the last page, revealing a signature written hastily at the bottom right. "This is Anatole's own hand." "But who sent it?" Hastings asked, brow furrowed. Poirot placed the folder on the table and tapped a single finger against the signature. "That, my friend, is precisely the question. The only people who would have access to Anatole's handwritten compositions are those closest to him, those who either helped conceal or preserve the truth. And I believe it was not sent to provoke guilt or stir curiosity. No, it was sent as an apology." Hastings looked doubtful. "You think Langley?" Poirot shook his head. "Langley has no interest in sentiment, and Viola is too direct. She would have told me if she had found such a thing." "Then who?" Poirot took up the phone and dialed swiftly. "Inspector Barnes, if you please," he said when the switchboard answered. There was a pause, and then Poirot's voice lowered. "Ah, Barnes, forgive the intrusion. I have received a package, yes, related to Hargrave Hall. I believe we must speak with someone who has remained, how shall I say, quietly on the periphery." His eyes twinkled as he replaced the receiver. "Who, Poirot?" Hastings asked again. Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Mademoiselle Iris Weatherby." Hastings blinked. "The housemaid?" "The former housemaid," Poirot corrected, "who, might I add, conveniently resigned a mere week before the police opened the crawl space, and who has since moved to Bath, if I am not mistaken." Hastings sat heavily. "You think she knew about Rousseau?" "I think she knew far more than she admitted, and may have been keeping certain things safe. This composition was not hidden with the others in the false wall. It had to have been kept elsewhere, perhaps in a place only a trusted servant could reach unnoticed." Hastings whistled. "Then why send it now?" Poirot folded the folder closed. "Because the weight of silence grows heavier when the truth has already begun to speak." The next day, Poirot and Hastings took the early train to Bath. Iris Weatherby now worked as a seamstress in a modest shop near the Avon River. She was older than her years, her hands roughened from thread and pin, her eyes wary behind thick glasses. When Poirot presented the folder, she trembled. "I thought it should be with someone who cared for the truth," she murmured. "Anatole, he trusted me, asked me to keep it safe in case something happened." "Why now?" Poirot asked gently. "Because for years I believed it was an accident, maybe a mistake. But when I saw Oliver arrested and read what they said in the papers, I knew that pretending didn't protect anyone anymore." Poirot studied her face. "Did you see what happened that night?" "No," she whispered. "But I heard them, the shouting, the crash, and I saw Langley, hours later, burning something in the fireplace. He said it was old drafts, but I saw the corner of a Paris envelope. I didn't say a word. I was too frightened." Poirot nodded. Merci, mademoiselle. You have done well. As they left the shop, Hastings exhaled. So Oliver killed Rousseau, but Langley tried to erase his memory. And nearly succeeded, Poirot replied. But now the music survives, and so does the truth. Chapter 18. The Final Note. The drawing-room of Hargrave Hall was awash with pale morning light, spilling through the tall windows and casting long shadows over the ornate rug. Hercule Poirot sat with his hands steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed in serene contemplation. Around him gathered the final players of a long and sorrowful drama. Inspector Barnes stood by the hearth, arms folded, while Hastings paced near the French doors. Oliver Pendleton, pale but composed, was flanked by his sister Viola and their cousin Langley. A fourth chair, unoccupied, bore the slim folder containing Anatole Rousseau's recovered composition. Poirot opened his eyes. "Monsieur, mesdames," he began quietly, "you have been most patient. But as in music, a composition is only complete when the final note is struck. And so we begin." He rose slowly, walking toward the folder on the table. "This piece, this single handwritten score, is not merely the work of a murdered man. It is a voice that would not be silenced. And, like the faint echo of a melody, it has led us back, step by step, to the truth." He looked at Oliver. "You told us you fought Rousseau, that you pushed him, and that he struck his head. A confession of sorts, but not the full truth, n'est-ce pas?" Oliver lowered his gaze, but said nothing. Poirot turned to Langley. "You, monsieur, stated you had no interest in Rousseau's music, that you saw no value in preserving his manuscripts, and yet I have it on good authority that you attempted to burn one of his letters on the night of his death." Langley's mouth tightened. It was meaningless. A note of rejection. Anatole's dramatics were legendary. "No," Poirot said gently. "It was not meaningless. It was the final letter Anatole ever wrote, and in it he threatened to reveal that the Pendleton siblings had been passing off his compositions as their own." Gasps broke across the room. Viola stiffened. "He was going to ruin us." "Exactly," Poirot said softly. "But more than that, he had planned to leave, to take his music and his truth with him. And that, I believe, is when Langley devised a solution." Langley scoffed. "I didn't kill him. I never even went into that room." "No," Poirot agreed. "You didn't need to, because Oliver was already in turmoil. Anatole had accused him, rightfully, of betrayal. But it was you, Langley, who whispered in his ear, who ensured that a confrontation took place that night. You knew Oliver would not hold his temper, and when it ended in tragedy, you acted swiftly, not to seek justice, but to preserve the Pendleton name." Poirot turned toward the fireplace, where a photograph of the original trio, Viola, Oliver and Anatole, still stood. Iris Weatherby heard the struggle. She saw you burning the letter, and though she kept silent, she preserved one thing, the score Anatole gave her for safekeeping. He trusted her more than anyone here. Viola's voice cracked. "He was our friend." "He was your benefactor," Poirot corrected, "and yet you buried his body beneath the very floor where his music was once played." Oliver finally stood. "I didn't mean to kill him," he whispered. "He pushed me, threatened to expose everything. I panicked." "But instead of facing the truth," Poirot said, "you allowed others to help conceal it. That is where the guilt lies, not in the heat of the moment, but in what followed. The silence, the lies, the theft of a voice." Inspector Barnes stepped forward. "Given the circumstances and your cooperation, we'll be speaking with the Crown Prosecution Service. But you'll have to come with me, Mr. Pendleton, both of you." He nodded toward Langley. Oliver didn't protest. Langley, red-faced, sputtered once, then fell silent. As they were escorted from the room, Viola remained behind, her eyes brimming. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Not at first. But I suspected, and I said nothing." Poirot nodded solemnly. "You allowed the lie to endure. But it is not too late to change that. Restore his name, attribute his music properly. That is the justice that remains." Viola looked at the folder. "I'll see to it." Later that week, Poirot and Hastings returned to London. The newspapers were filled with headlines. Composer's body found after decade-long deception, scandal at Hargrave Hall, and the forgotten genius, Anatole Rousseau's music to be published posthumously. As they sat in Poirot's flat, the recovered composition played softly from the gramophone. It was a melancholy piece, elegant, sorrowful, yet hauntingly beautiful. Hastings leaned back in his chair. "It's strange, Poirot. We began with a violin case and a missing bridge, and ended with a hidden body and stolen music." Poirot smiled faintly. "Such is often the way, mon ami. The clues do not always shout. Sometimes they hum, quietly, persistently, like the final vibration of a string, and if you listen, truly listen, you hear what others overlook." He raised his cup. "To the silent ones, Hastings, those who wait patiently for justice." Hastings lifted his own. "To the final note." The music swelled, lingered in the air, and faded into silence.